Okay, the recording has started, so let's look at the usual rules and we'll go from here. Today's topic is the second part of the modifier workshop that we began last week. So we're going to look, among other things, at some modifiers that contain the word that, and we're basically just continuing the modifiers workshop that we started last week. So first, the rules, same rules that we always talk about on here. Problem submissions, please don't, let's deactivate the whiteboard because apparently people are being funky. Okay. Please don't submit problems that are too general, but also not too specific. In other words, you can't submit something that amounts to the entire GMAT at once, but you also can't submit something that is like a single problem with one question about it. Because the ones that are too general, there's nothing we can do about that, right? If you're asking about the whole test at once, then what are we going to do? But too specific, also not great. That's why we have the forum. So if you're just asking about a single problem, then please do that on the forum. There's the address. And okay, also please don't submit personal study plans and the like. That's not the purpose of this study hall. Remember that this is watched by hundreds or even thousands of people. So if we're just talking about one individual person's plan, we're kind of wasting everybody else's time. So we want to make sure we're talking about actual GMAT topics. So if you have questions about your study plan, there is a place for that. It's on the forum. It's the folder entitled General Questions. And if you have questions about admissions and business schools in particular, then there's also an Ask the Admissions Consultant folder where MBA Admission kind of has a permanent guest spot. So what we should see, topics of intermediate scope, not too broad, not too narrow, etc. And if you cite specific problems, please ask some sort of more general question about those problems. So if you just ask about a single problem, we will have you put that on the forum. So please ask a general question. Smiley face if the stuff on this slide makes sense. The smiley face buttons over there on the left. Okay, good stuff. Again, please don't submit official guide problems. Also, please don't submit single problems outside of a context. Make sure that you submit non-official guide problems with a context. And make sure you cite the source of the problem that you give us. Finally, please don't be rude, even if it's by accident. I mean, remember that everybody here presumably has the ultimate goal of conducting business in English. So it is sort of important that you understand and respect the rules of professional etiquette here, like what counts as rude, what doesn't. But basically you can't say things like, I expect you to cover this, or, you know, this should happen. I mean, those things are not okay from the professional etiquette standpoint. So there we go. Finally, please check the archives. There's something like 60 of these recordings by this point. There's a huge, huge number of them, and so we've covered a lot of topics already. What that means is that a lot of the topics that people are submitting are already in the archive. So please first check the archive for the topic you want to submit and make sure it's not already in there. If it is, then go ahead and watch the archive recording. And then if there's some aspect of the topic that we haven't covered in the archive, then feel free to submit it and say which aspects have not been covered. So the archive, if you don't know where to find it, it's on the main Thursdays with Ron page. It's on the same page where you would sign up. If you Google Thursdays with Ron, it'll go to it. If you just scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of archived recordings. So smiley face, if all these rules make sense. Again, smiley face button over there on your left. I see a lot of new faces today. We have a lot of people in attendance, so good stuff. Okay. The problems from today are all going to be from the GMAT Prep software. They're all from the original version of GMAT Prep, which is like not the version that came out 3 weeks ago. Although from what we understand, most of the problems in those two versions of the software are actually the same. So the problems we're going to see in today's session are from GMAT Prep. Because we want to make sure we're using problems that are official, is basically the deal. When you answer the problems in class, what you're going to see right now is 5 multiple choice options. You should see those underneath the list of names. When you get a multiple choice question, please use those buttons to answer. The other people in the session will not see your answer. It's important that you not click more than once on the button. If you click twice, your second click will undo your first click. So please click the button exactly once. If you change your answer, please click the new button exactly once. Any questions, please type them in the chat box. Smiley face if this all makes sense. Okay. So for those of you who are latecomers, the theme of today's session is to continue the modifiers workshop in sentence correction. So we're going to start doing some modifiers. Again, please use the answer buttons. And let's go ahead and put the first problem on the board. How about this? I'll give you a timer. Again, please use the answer buttons to indicate your answer. Please use the A through E buttons. Do not answer in the chat box, please. Okay, go for it. Okay, that's time, so please indicate an answer pretty soon. Remember, this is the GMAT. This is a test on which you have to pick something, even if you are totally guessing. Like, there's no option of not picking an answer. So keep that in mind, please. So if you are Amika or Ari or JT or Vishal, please pick something. Okay, so here's our results. So a lot of people picking A, a lot of people picking B. Let's talk about it. So, okay, let's talk about the distinction at the front of the sentence here, which is this modifier thing that, it's actually not a modifier in this case, this is a clause, but let's talk about this clause starting with that. That creatures of the seabed were suffering versus creatures that were suffering. Let's have a little chat about that. Okay. So the person who wrote me a message, I got you. All right. What's going on with that distinction? Can anybody tell me? Chat box, if you know what the deal is there. So, right, the question is, what did the study reveal? I'm glad that you guys are not just calling this an idiom, because it's not just an idiom. So, the question is, what's the difference between something like revealed that X verb versus revealed some noun X. Like, this is not an idiomatic difference. Like, you can reveal that something is true, and you can also reveal some noun or something. So, I mean, let's here are two correct instances of this same sort of thing. Like, instead of the word reveal, we'll use the word indicate, but it's the same kind of thing. So here are two correct sentences. The first one is this: the map, the crime map, indicates that violent crime is increasing at various locations in the city. Another correct sentence is the crime map indicates the locations of various violent crimes in the city over the last couple of months. So both of these are actually correct. So let's talk about the difference in what's going on here. We have indicates that violent crime is increasing versus indicates the locations. Like, what is this? What's the difference here? One of the posters is talking about, I actually don't know what relative pronoun means. I would have to look that up. So, but it's not really a grammar issue. So it's not the kind of thing where you have to know terms like relative pronoun or whatever. A couple people are saying the subject. What do you mean by the subject focus is different? Like, what? Blesil, tell me a little bit more. Yeah, I like what this poster put, indicates something that is explained in a sentence. Like, if you, let's put that up there. When you use the whole clause like this is what the user C Ying here is saying. You use this kind of construction when you're talking about the actual entire idea of this clause. So, to refer to the entire, I mean, that's basically the way I can explain that. To refer to the whole idea of this clause, you use that plus clause. Versus if you are actually just talking about this noun, then you can just use the noun. I mean, there's some modifiers that are attached to that noun. But the idea ultimately of that sentence is the noun, like it's actually the locations that are on the map. So if the actual noun is the focus, then it's okay to use the noun. So here the noun would be not the focus. Like, you would not write indicates violent crimes that are increasing, because the map doesn't indicate crimes, at least as far as, not according to this sentence. According to this sentence, the map just shows the idea that crime is going up, but it doesn't actually show crimes. So whereas in this sentence, the map actually shows locations. So if we apply the same sort of idea, so that's very well explained. Like, people who posted in the box, thank you, nicely done. If we look at D and E here, let's look at that idea. I mean, did the study actually reveal creatures? So did the study actually reveal creatures? No, it did not. I mean, it showed this idea. It showed the idea that creatures were, that their food supply was diminishing or whatever. The question you have to ask yourself, like a lot of other things tested on this exam, it's a question of meaning. And you have to ask yourself, is the meaning of the sentence the noun, or is the meaning of the sentence the whole idea of that red thing? So did it actually reveal creatures, or did it reveal the idea contained in this clause? So of those two, it's the latter. Like, the study didn't reveal any creatures. Instead, the study showed that the dwindling food supply was causing issues for those creatures. So there you go. That means that we don't want D and we don't want E. Any questions about that idea, go ahead and throw them in the text box. Otherwise, we can have a brief discussion of the rest of those choices. So again, it's a meaning-based issue. I mean, on the forums, a lot of people have been talking about this as though it were an idiom. But it isn't. It's a difference in what the sentence is actually trying to say. So as usual, you have to figure out first what's the message, like what idea is the sentence trying to convey. So let's go ahead and take this over to the next page and talk about the rest of the choices. So we did eliminate these two on the last slide. So now let's talk about A, B, and C. Does anybody have any insight on those in the chat box? What about A versus B versus C? Any thoughts on those? Yeah, Shy T has it. I mean, the main idea here is, again, it's meaning. It's like, what's the message? Like, what are we trying to actually convey? So, I mean, there is grammar tied into this whole thing, but this is suffering from the supplies themselves versus suffering because clause versus suffering because of noun again. So it's not, there's no word that in front of this time, but it's basically the same idea, right? Like, this is a noun. This is a whole clause or idea, and this is a noun again. So even though the word that is not here, but this is the same idea tested on the previous slide. It's what do we mean again? Like, what's the message? So, were the creatures actually suffering from the supplies, which would be the noun, or were they suffering because of the idea contained in that clause? Were they suffering because the supplies were running down? So if you realize this is the issue, it's probably pretty clear which way this one goes. It's not, the supplies themselves are not the cause of the suffering. The suffering comes from the fact that the supplies are being depleted. So, same sort of idea as the previous one. So the ones that say they were suffering from the supplies are inaccurate, but they were suffering because those supplies were running down. That's the idea. Any questions about that distinction? If you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the box. I see a couple people typing. While people are typing, let's go ahead and put a general sort of takeaway on the board here. So what should you get out of this? If you see a distinction between a noun and a whole clause, ask yourself, what's the message? Like, are we talking about just the noun? Or are we talking about the whole clause? So it's not, again, it's not a difference that you can memorize. Like, you have to understand what it is that the sentence is talking about. So ask yourself, what's the message? Are we talking about the noun, or are we talking about the whole clause? Also, let me give you guys a little bit of a hint as far as how you can better learn about this stuff too. So let's take this over to the next page and talk about it real quickly. One of the best ways that you can teach yourself to use these kinds of things better is to make your own examples. And what you might find most helpful, so what you might find especially that you might want to do, is to create contrasting examples using similar topic ideas in order to highlight the differences between the constructions. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Like, if you say, here are two sentences. Again, both of them are correct. Historical data show that many men were unemployed during the Great Depression, versus these old pictures show many men who were unemployed during the Great Depression. So these are both correct because these both mean what we want them to mean. Like, what do the pictures show in this sentence? Well, I mean, a picture can't show the idea that men were unemployed, right? Like, the picture has to show somebody. So the picture actually shows men. But data don't show people. Like, they don't show people's faces. They're data. But what the data can show is this whole idea that lots of guys didn't have jobs. So this would be correct, and this would also be correct. And if you are making your own examples, you can also go ahead and make your own examples of the incorrect versions just to make sure that you understand. So for instance, you also might want to side by side with that. You might want to make the incorrect examples. Like, if you have historical data show many men who were unemployed during the Great Depression, this is incorrect, and make sure you know why. Be sure you know why. Like, it's not possible. You can't have data that show people, because that's what, like, pictures do. Also, in this case, these old pictures show that many men were unemployed during the Great Depression. This is also not reasonable because you can't, I mean, a picture can't show that someone doesn't have a job. So not a reasonable meaning. So it helps to construct your own examples from these kinds of things. All right, let's see what people are asking in the text box. There's a million questions. Okay, let's see what we can do with these without running out of time. All right, first of all, any questions about the examples on this page? Is this clear to everyone what's happening here? Smiley face if these examples make sense to you guys. Okay, smiley face there. All right, so here's the problem about sea creatures again, and let's look at some of these questions that people are asking. Here's a question. Any difference? Does B/W mean between? That's not something I've seen before. I mean, from context, I think it's pretty clear that it means between, but I've never seen that. Okay. So this kind of difference, again, would be a meaning difference. Like this is another what are we talking about kind of thing. This is another what's the message type issue. So, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. Like, increasing is not a standalone word. Like, if you have increasing noun is basically the noun. But an increase in the noun is the increase, not the noun. So, for example, if you say something like, here are 4 more examples of this kind of thing. So, the increase, or like political situations in the Middle East have caused an increase in gas prices versus political situations in the Middle East have caused increasing gas prices. And then the increase in gas prices has caused or is taking up a larger and larger portion of the average American family's budget versus increasing gas prices are taking up a larger and larger portion of the average American family's budget. Okay, so if we look at sentences 1, 2, 3, and 4 here, the ones that are okay here are number 1 and number 4, and number 2 and 3 are incorrect. So just make sure that you know why. Again, it's almost precisely the same idea as the examples that we've been looking at here. So this question ties in kind of nicely with today's situations. But it's just a matter of what you mean. Like what is, again, the issue is what's the message. So in the first couple of sentences, the political situations don't cause the price itself. What they do is they cause the price to go up. So it's accurate to say they've caused an increase, and it's not accurate to say they've caused prices. On the other hand, in the second group of sentences, the actual message is that the price of gas takes up a larger chunk of people's budget. So it's not the increase. So the increase is taking up a larger and larger portion. That's not accurate. Like an increase doesn't take up part of your budget. Instead, it's the prices which are increasing that take up that portion. So this is sort of the same deal. Resulting from that's not really been a thing that they've made clear decisions on in the official books, so we should probably stay away from that one. And then, yeah, I think that kind of covers it. The resulting and as a result of, they're not 100% consistent in their use of that, so we should Stay away from that. Question about aggravating health conditions in the text box. So seeing, this is another example of the same sort of thing. So can I say the patient is suffering from aggravating health conditions? I think this is a pretty clear-cut situation. I think that it's the health condition that's causing the suffering. Like, I don't really see an ambiguity here. Like in this situation, the health condition itself is causing the suffering. Like it's not the fact that the health condition aggravates the person that makes them suffer. It's the actual health condition. Right? Like if I don't know, if I have an injury that is painful, like it's actually the injury that causes me pain. It's not the fact that the injury is painful that causes me pain. I mean, that sounds like a subtle difference, but it's not really. Like it's the actual injury that's the issue. So same thing here. The short answer to this, can I say this sort of thing? The answer is yes, you can. In fact, that's the thing that you would do. And I would say, by contrast, that this is not true. Because this abstract idea is not what the patient is suffering from. Like, the patient is actually suffering from the health condition itself. Like, the disease is directly making the patient suffer. So there's that issue. Okay. There's a couple other people typing stuff. So, Katie, no, because that's still the supplies. And even though the supplies are dwindling, the supplies are not causing the problem. It's kind of like this example. It's like the second sentence out of these four in response to Katie's question. I mean, the idea is not the prices, just like the idea is not the food supplies. It's the suffering comes from the dwindling of those supplies, just like the political tensions are causing the increase. I mean, you have to ask yourself, is it the noun or is it not the noun? If food supplies don't cause suffering, then they don't. So, okay. No one else is typing, so I think we can escape from this problem while we have the chance. So let's look at another one. Let's look at how about this one? Okay. Clear your answers. Please use the answer buttons. I'll give you a little bit less time here because it's a shorter sentence. So please use the answer buttons, the A through E buttons, to indicate your answer. Thanks. All right, go for it. Okay, it looks like the stopwatch has run out, so if you don't have an answer yet, please pick one. Okay. That means Dilip. You gotta pick something here, my man. Remember on the GMAT, okay, there you go. So here are some answers. Remember, it's a test where you have to answer it. Wow, that's a strong majority. Okay. Well, let's take a look. So radiocarbon dating shows or suggests or indicates, again, notice the difference, suggests that clause versus suggest at least a portion, which is a noun. So it's not an idiom. Again, the idea is what's the message. So do we want the whole idea of the clause, or do we just want the noun? So what's the message? Like, does radiocarbon dating, like what does that actually suggest? Well, does it suggest the noun, which would be, i.e., does it suggest the actual portion? Or does it suggest the idea of the clause, which would be, does it suggest the idea that part of the area was ice-free? So, well, I mean, you're looking at, you have to understand the message of the sentence. It's not the noun, because, I mean, it doesn't, like radiocarbon dating doesn't give you geographical locations. Instead, it's like the message of the sentence, and I mean, again, there's no like formula for figuring this out. You just have to kind of read it the way that you would read these ideas in a magazine or something. Like the message of the sentence is definitely that, you know, from looking at a bunch of fossils, scientists figured out that there were some parts, like that there existed some parts of the coast that were ice-free. Like the fossils don't give you a map. Instead, it's just they figured out that there were parts of the coast that didn't have ice. So, all right. That means we don't want suggest at least a portion. So these don't make sense. Any questions about that? Okay, the difference between A and C, does anyone want to take a shot at that? Not a major topic here, but does anybody want to? This will disappear for a second. Does anybody want to take a crack at, it's not a subject-verb agreement issue. A lot of people are saying that, but the subject-verb agreement is fine. A portion, at least a portion, is singular, and was remaining is also singular. Yeah, it's a verb tense issue. So let's take a moment to talk about this, but first let's make sure we note that verb tense is not a major topic. You shouldn't concentrate on it as much as you should on things like parallelism and agreement and meaning and so on. So, oh, that subject verb agreement. Haha, I'm being stupid. Okay, I thought you guys were talking about this. So, yes, I did not even see that. So we'll talk about this verb tense, and then also, thank you for catching that. More obviously, there's suggest versus suggest. I don't know why I didn't see that. More clearly, thank you for seeing what I'm apparently not seeing. Subject-verb agreement, thank you. Yeah, it's radiocarbon dating of a bunch of stuff suggests. It's one of those days. Not suggests. So that's one reason to kill A right there. It's actually good that we're seeing that, because this is what I mean when we say, yeah, exactly. It validates what we said about verb tense. When we say it's not a major topic, this actually means two different things. The first thing that it means is that it's not tested that often in the first place. But more importantly, number two, it's almost always tested in conjunction with major topics. Just as it is here. Like, you actually don't need to focus on the verb tense issue here, because there's also a subject-verb agreement issue, which is much more obvious. Apparently to the whole world except me. This is what usually happens. Like, if you have a verb tense split, if you look closely, there'll usually be something else that you can also use as a criterion. Like, there'll be a parallelism, or there'll be some pronoun issue, or there'll be something of some type that you can use instead. So, I mean, we'll still quickly talk about this verb tense difference, but we shouldn't spend like 1,000 years talking about it. But does anybody have any questions? I mean, have we cleared the air? Yes, there is a subject-verb agreement. The issue is over here. Any questions about this stuff? Okay, still a little confused with the idea versus noun. I mean, when you first read the sentence, the meaning that the sentence suggests to you should be that when they looked at these fossils, they figured out that parts of the coast didn't have ice. Because it's the radiocarbon dating that suggests that. Like, if you, radiocarbon dating doesn't serve as a map. Like, it's the dating of the fossils doesn't serve as any kind of map here. So if you pick the ones that are B, D, or E, you'd be saying radiocarbon dating itself, like the actual process where you figure out how old stuff is, gives you a map of the area. That doesn't really make sense. So, okay. This, same sort of deal. Dilip, hope that helps. If not, then what that means is that you should focus a little bit more on what the sentence means when you initially read it. So, yeah. The difference between was remaining and remained is, I don't know the names of these tenses, so we would have to like Google search that or something, but let me just tell you how these things are used. Was remaining, this is the kind of tense that's used. This tense is used for something that was going on when something else happened. Like, for instance, was remaining is a weird thing here, but I could give you an example with a different verb that would be easier to understand. If I said something like, I was sleeping when the doorbell rang. So this was going on, and then this point event occurred while that was going on. So this point event occurred while that was going on. So that's how you would use this tense, and that's not happening here. Like, it's not while this area was remaining ice-free, something else happened. So instead, you're just talking about an isolated fact in the past. When you talk about isolated facts in the past, they're not being related to other things, then you just use the regular past tense. So, for isolated past events that are not being related to other things by the sentence, they're not explicitly related to other events in the sentence in these kinds of ways. Just use the normal past tense. So here we have one isolated fact about the past. These parts of the coast were free of ice. And that's it. It's not they were free of ice while anything else happened, and it's not anything else happened while they were free of ice, and it's not they had been free of ice before this occurred. It's not any of those. It's like there's one random fact about the past here, and that's it. And so you use the past tense. So questions here. Give me a smiley face C thingy if this makes sense. Okay. All right. Satish, the example you have there, I think is in one of our other study halls. I think it's in the study hall that says modifier placement. But the issue in that one is about where certain modifiers do and don't belong. If I remember right, I think we did a whole thing on that, including other examples. So you should check that recording out. Let me just paste that on the board in case people don't know what I'm talking about. So here. Satish posted this example in the chat box. This is a slightly different issue. This is a placement issue. So I don't want to talk about this in this session because we talked about it in the other one. But here, this is a different kind of issue. Because things are moved around rather than changed into something else. So this problem is discussed in the modifier placement study hall. I don't know the exact date of that study hall, but you should be able to search it. So this is not the point right now. Okay, let's move on to another problem. Let's look at I think it might have been the last study hall. Not sure. Not 100% sure. Okay. How about this one? Satish says November 17th. You're probably right. Okay, go for it. Have fun. Okay, please pick something here if you have not already. Okay, everybody but SP. So, SP if you're here. Okay, there you go. Actually, RE and RE, well, RE you're working. Biggs, you gotta pick something. Dillip, you gotta pick something. Biggs, Dillip. Okay, so here's your statistics. Alright, so there's a divide here. We have a lot of people who like C and a lot of people who like E. And then certain numbers of people who like the other choices. But let's take a look. Does anybody have anywhere to start discussing this? Preferably with some sort of split. Okay, let's talk about subject-verb agreement. The question is, why are we looking at subject-verb agreement? Well, we have a split, right? We have are is a plural verb, but then this is a singular verb, and this is a singular verb. So whenever you see that kind of thing, when you see singular verb versus plural verb, you should go find the subject of each verb. Now notice that among the surest indications cannot be a subject, because that's not a thing. It's not a noun, right? Prepositional phrases are modifiers. So as a background, make sure you know this. Like if you say 2 cars are in the driveway, 1 car is in the driveway. In the driveway is 1 car. In the driveway are 2 cars. These are all correct sentences. Because the subject of the last 2 is not the driveway, right? Like this is a prepositional phrase, I believe it's called. But the point is that this is a modifier type of construction that is not a noun. It's not a thing that can be a subject. In spoken English, people use these kinds of things as subject a lot. Like you hear people say stuff all the time, like, "Oh, in that box is where I left it." But you can't use "in the box" as the subject of something in real English. So the things in parentheses are not allowed to be subjects. So parentheses not allowed to be the subject of any verb at all. So what that means is that these last 2 are reverse constructions. The subject of the 3rd sentence is 1 car, and the subject of the 4th sentence is 2 cars. Same thing, 2 cars are in the driveway, 1 car is. So if we apply that principle to what's up there, I mean, among the surest indications of spun-spot cycles cannot be a subject. So that means that all of these things, at least the ones that are sentences at all, are in the reverse construction. So this is a verb, and that's a subject, or at least it's supposed to be. It's kind of like in the driveway is a car, in the driveway are 2 cars. This is a verb, and this is supposed to be the subject. This doesn't even have a verb. Like it would have to be is believed to be or are believed to be. There's no verb here in D. And then is believed to be the rate. So yeah, D is not a sentence, as Kurt helpfully points out. Provocar, the sentence that you're typing in the box, is correct, and that would be a sentence. So, because a Corolla is among the many cars, yeah. So the ones here that don't work are that one, which is plural, and the rate is a noun, it's singular. This one is a mismatch, and this one's not even a sentence. So we're down to C versus E. Those were the 2 most popular choices, so I think you guys are mostly on the same page as far as that goes. So, questions so far about that? That's not a modifiers issue. That's really just more subject-verb. But any questions there? Okay, so now let's talk about C versus E. Let's take this problem over to the next page. Alright, so let's get rid of the choices that we've already killed here. So that's out. That's out. Okay, who can help us distinguish between C and E? Can anybody give a little bit of insight? So yeah, all right. Well, from last time, like what have we learned before about moving modifiers around? So this is a modifier. What is seen in the rings? Someone tell me in the text box. Like what's actually seen in the rings in the cross sections of trees? Like what do we actually see? Yeah, it's the rate of growth, right? So people can see the rate of growth. They can see the growth rate in the rings. So remember that when stuff is moved around, I mean, this is here, this is moved over here. In one of the previous study halls, I think it was one of the more recent ones, but like when stuff is moved around, we talked about that kind of situation. You should ask yourself, it's going to be a meaning-based distinction. Ask yourself, what is talking about what? So that is a description of the rate at which trees grow. So this is really unnecessarily far away from that, and this is right next to it. So that's one strike in favor of E and against C. Like this is way far away from the description. This is right next to the description. Also, what's on Earth? Same issue, right? That's also moved around. Let's talk about that. What's on Earth? Yeah, it's not an idiomatic construction. Who users saying that it's not. What I'm trying to show you here is it's not at all. It's a placement issue. One of the sentences says stuff that the other one doesn't say. So sunspot cycles are not on Earth. I mean, sunspot cycles are on the sun. So that can't be it. It's the indications, right? The indications are on Earth. And I mean, you really have to understand what the sentence is trying to tell you to make decisions like this. What the sentence is trying to say is, in other words, like you are looking for signs on Earth that will tell you about sunspot cycles, where sunspot cycles are an event that occurs nowhere near Earth. But you're looking for like signs that are on Earth, even though you're trying to investigate an event that is really far away from Earth. And like when you first read the sentence, you should get that meaning. Like it should be the only goal of reading the sentence in the first place is to establish this kind of thing. So it's really important that you do. It's to figure out like what the heck am I even talking about in the first place. So, well, again, let's look at E. Indications on Earth, also right next to the description. And here, whoa, not even close. So, not good. So we're going to want E here, not C. In fact, a couple of you guys have hinted at this. C actually means something different altogether. So we'll go into that in a second. But when you see this sort of thing, again, stuff is moved around, this is how you should be splitting it. You should be like, okay, what things talk about what other things, and I should just try to slap those right up next to each other as much as I can. So, any questions about the location of this stuff? Okay, let me point out one more thing here about Seeing actually nailed this one, so I'm just going to quote from Seeing here. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you, okay. This is a different issue, but it's also worth, as long as we're on this problem, we might as well talk about it. When you, yeah, in choice C, right. Like, if you have prep phrase plus comma plus sentence, then that prep phrase should describe the entire sentence, like the entire idea of the sentence. So this is really, really important. Like, let me try to give you a couple examples of this. Like if I say, we can probably just move all of this up there. Let me scoot these things up, because we don't really need that sentence anymore. So here's an example. If you say something like, in Louisiana, comma, hurricanes are said to be a manifestation of God's anger, versus hurricanes in Louisiana are said to be a manifestation of God's anger. Okay, like these don't mean the same thing. Like in the second sentence, what's in Louisiana? Text box. Just the hurricanes, right? So in the second sentence, this means weirdly enough that like if a hurricane is in the state of Louisiana, then people think God is angry, but if the hurricane is in Mississippi or Alabama, then God is just fine. So it's like this just means to hurricanes. This refers only to hurricanes in Louisiana. Like in other words, hurricanes specifically in Louisiana are the result of God's anger. But hurricanes in other states may not be. Kind of weird, but you know, I'm making up the sentence on the spot here, so the best we can do. What does the first one mean though? Like if we say in Louisiana hurricanes are said to be blah 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 blah, what does this mean? Like what's the difference between this and the other sentence? Yeah, Katie. Right. People in Louisiana think this, but they think it about hurricanes everywhere. Exactly. So yeah. So the belief is about all hurricanes. But the belief, which is the idea of the whole clause, is held, that's what they held, by people in Louisiana. Let's fix that typo. So the same sort of thing here, Seeing is right on the mark with this. Like the other big problem with sentence C here is that it seems like people on Earth think that this is true, but that like aliens on Mars think this is false or something. This doesn't work. But what we're supposed to mean in this sentence is that like among all of the indications that are actually on Earth, this is one of the best ones. Meaning that if you could look at indications like on the sun, you would have a lot better indications because you're looking for sunspot cycles. But if you have to look at stuff on Earth, then this is as good as you're going to get. So that's a good point. And you can also retain this about prepositional phrases out in front of sentences. They're supposed to describe the entire thing. So nicely done. Any questions about this, about these examples, about whatever else? I don't see anybody else typing anything, so I think we're happy people. Okay, let's look at one more problem, and then we can kill it for the day. Actually, before we look at one more problem, well, let's look at one more problem first, and then we'll tie it back into one more thing about sunspot cycles. So here's one more. Please, same drill, use the answer buttons, please. And you know the drill. So here's your timer. Go for it. All right, let's answer this. We're waiting on an Amika, something, Ankur, Prabhakar. Okay, Prabhakar, you're good. And I think that's it. So let's look. Okay. Here are the choices that you guys picked. Let's discuss. Let me highlight something. Let's talk about that. How about this? Like, what if you have the noun, that, subject, verb. What is that? Like, that looks kind of like garbage when we write it in symbols like that. So here's a few more examples. The ball that I hit. The book that I read. The test that I took. And by the way, in these constructions, notice that for the most part, the word that is going to be optional. You can, if the meaning is clear without that, then that is going to be something you can omit. And unless it actually clarifies something. Like, what do all these things have in common? So how does this construction work? So, yeah, I hit the ball is what the ball that I hit means. In other words, if you guys know what an object of a verb is, that's kind of what this is. It means that I did this action to this thing. So I hit the ball. This would mean I read the book. And this would mean I took the test. So the noun is basically the object. I mean, I don't want to state that in terms of words because it'll just be unintelligible. But just make sure you know that this is the same idea as if you transform it this way. So if you can say the ball that I hit, then that means you hit the ball. If you can say the book that I read, that means I read the book. If you can say the test I took or the test that I took, that means I took the test. So what that means by extension is if you say the last day that they are scheduled to collect, what that means is that they collect days. So I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? The last day that they collect means they have to collect that day. Nobody's collecting days, so this doesn't work. When you do this, make sure that you don't, there's one thing that looks similar to this that you don't want to confuse it with. Let me go ahead and compress this. Let me illustrate before we move on to other things. Okay, so move this up there a little bit. Alright, this would mean I took the test. Alright. One thing you want to be careful of that looks like this that's different is the following. Don't confuse with like idea that or notion that, etc. So if you say something like the idea that you can jump 10 feet in the air is ridiculous. This is a different thing. Like when you talk about idea or notion or concept or saying or anything like that, then you're describing the idea with the following clause. But there's a big difference here, which is that these are concrete things that are the objects of stuff, and this is not. This is like a concept. So just make sure you notice that both of these are okay. So the idea that you can jump 10 feet in the air is absurd. But the idea that you mentioned in class yesterday is absurd. Like, this is the two different constructions, so make sure that you know both of these are okay. Like, this is, the first one of these is that type of construction. The idea that you can jump 10 feet into the air, like, this is the idea. So on the other hand, this one is an example of the other construction. This is like the book that the ball that I hit or the book that I read or anything. It's all context. As usual, you have to understand what the, like you mentioned the idea. So if you know what object is, that's what's going on. So with things like idea, saying, notion, concept, it could be either of these two things, which could potentially be confusing. But make sure you know how that works. But the last day they are scheduled to collect is out and out not okay, because you don't collect days. And a day is not like an idea or a concept, so it can't work this way. So this also ties in with the last problem, because the rate that trees grow also doesn't work. So that's, you can only eliminate one choice on that, but it's still an elimination, right? Like the rate that trees grow would mean that trees can actually plant rates in the ground and grow them. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Trees don't grow rates. So the rate that they grow, not okay. The reason this is challenging is because people talk like that. Like if you say the day that we met, that's wrong unless you meet days, but people know what you mean. So you can't say the day that we met. I mean, in writing, it would have to be the day on which we met, or something like that. So there's that. Alright. Let me run you through the rest of this really quickly because we're starting to run out of time here, and I'm on a schedule today that's very tight. So you have a comparison here which is unlike most severance packages. So something actually has to contrast with severance packages. So the long and short of that is, what is unlike severance packages? So I mean, it has to be another pay package. So unlike severance packages, workers do this, no. Workers do this, no. The automobile company, no. The company's package, yes. The company's package, yes. We actually have to have a comparison between packages. So that actually leaves us with D like dog. So there. All right. That's the major splittage in this problem. Splittage is not really a word, but you get the point. Those are the major criteria here. So we're going to go ahead and close up shop here in a second. Subtle meaning difference. I mean, I wouldn't really call these differences in meaning subtle. Like, what might be subtle is the constructions themselves. But if you look at the differences we've been looking at in this study hall, the differences are not subtle. Like, if you this was the first problem here. There's a big, big difference between indicating creatures, like actually pointing at animals and saying, look at these cute animals, versus like actually indicating that there's a problem with those animals. Like that's not a subtle difference. Like what might be subtle is the way that the things are constructed, but the meaning differences should be very large for the most part. If there really is a super subtle meaning difference, it won't be required in the problem. There will be other avenues. So, but once you learn how these constructions work, then you should find that the differences are bigger than you thought they were. Like this. This is a very big difference. So, okay, hope that helps. Other quick questions? Anything real quick before we close down here? Okay, I don't see anybody typing. Okay, one person is typing. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording. Okay, nobody's typing. All right, we're going to kill the recording. Thank you for coming. And we will see you again in, I want to say 2 weeks, although I know with Memorial Day holiday there's some quirk in the schedule. But check the Thursday's homepage for updates as far as the next scheduled date, and we'll post it. Thanks for coming, and appreciate it. Good night. Good luck. We are going to, at this point, kill the recording and see you in 2 weeks or possibly 3 weeks or whenever the next session may be. So, awesome. Good night.